Good morning, church. Happy Wednesday. It's good to be with you again. And as we hit our reading in Joshua here today, I think it's our saddest reading to date. We have a lot of bad things going on in the nation of Israel, and the initial victories happening in Joshua quickly give way to a series of curses and defeats. And the primary reasons, He lays them out. He says, you didn't do what I told you to do. Just like we talked about yesterday, God is under no obligation to continue supplying blessings when his people choose to become disobedient. And there's a couple things at play that I think are worth considering, seeing if we can apply them into our circumstance today. The first is that they were initially unable to defeat some of the enemies that were in their lands. Now, this was intentional on God's part. Remember, he said, I'll give you the land little by little so that it doesn't become too much for you. And so there were some people they couldn't push out initially that when they were able to do it later, they didn't. They forced them into service, but they didn't drive them out of the land. And God discloses later on, he says in chapter 3, I did this to test you, and you didn't pass the test. Instead, we see the Israelites intermarrying, turning to those gods, and starting the cycle of disobedience, crying out, getting redeemed, disobeying again. And so we might think, are there times that God leaves an obstacle in my life that I might continue to pray, continue to turn, continue to trust God so that I have more opportunities to show my obedience later on? And God sometimes will not remove barriers in our life. I think about Paul, whatever his thorn in the flesh was. Some folks think he had seizures. Others think he had a vision issue because he talks about to the Galatians, boy, if you could have, you would have ripped out your own eyes for me. But whatever his thorn in the flesh was, God didn't take it away. He simply said, my grace is sufficient for you. So we see that barriers, that testings come. And if God doesn't initially remove a barrier that we know he wants us to overcome, when we have the opportunity to do it, we must, because God may have left it there as a way to test us later on. The other thing that we see is that lack of teaching. This is my least favorite line in the whole thing. It says they buried him, Joshua, in the territory of his inheritance in Timnath-Heres, in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash. The whole generation was also gathered to their ancestors. After them, another generation rose up, who did not know the Lord or the works he had done for Israel. Just one generation. We're always one generation away from a total collapse. And if we look at the statistics that people like George Barna put up, we regularly see that there's a downward trend. We're not doing a good job of teaching the next generation about the Lord. And so we need to be in the habit of Christian education for ourselves. We need to know, because you can't pass on what you don't have. You can't give what's not yours. And then we need to be in the habit of passing on to the next generation, whether that's the next generation of Christians, so discipleship for even adults who come to the faith, not just leaving people who confess the faith to their own devices to figure things out, but discipling them, raising them up. And then of our physical next generation, the children need to be taught, need to know about who the Lord is, because without him and without the goodness he brings, we can see the result culturally. We just need to look out and see what happens when we turn our back on the Lord. And the time is really right for us to re-engage our communities. The statistics that are out there right now are so sad. Just to share a couple and to remind us that these are the kind of things that should drive us on. The Guttmacher Institute, or the Guttmacher Institute, is a pro-abortion research agency, said that in 2023 there was over 1 million abortions. So I went over and checked out the census website to see how many births there were. There was 3.6 million births in 2023. And so if we had that at 4.6, add those together, about 4.6 million viable pregnancies, means that 22% of all pregnancies ended in abortion last year. Is a gut-wrenching and a heart-breaking statistic. Among our kids, there's some population groups among our kids where upwards of 30% are identifying as something other than what they are. We have a generation that hates truth and believes they can be their own God. And so we just need to be about the business of helping, just like Jesus gave to Peter. We have the keys to the kingdom, and we have the knowledge. We have the ability to go out and share the truth in God's power. Jesus said, if we're praying in faith, we can demolish mountains. These are certainly mountains, church, that we need to be in prayer over. Prayer with fasting, to go out and to seek to reach this generation for Christ. And so I hope that's an encouragement to you. When I think of these things, it's always an encouragement to me, and it really is a heartbreaking time, but we know the one who mends all heartbreak and all sorrow. So let's go tell someone about him.